When my father's lawyer read his will, he said, "Your inheritance is $40 million, contingent on you confessing what you did to your brother." I hadn't spoken to my brother Theo in 11 years, and my father knew exactly why. The lawyer's name was Hargrove, some silver-haired man in a suit that cost more than my rent. He read the rest of the will first: the beach house to charity, the art collection to a museum, $3 million to the housekeeper who'd worked for my father for 30 years. Then he looked up at me over his reading glasses and said it again, slowly, like I hadn't heard him the first time. "The remaining estate, totaling approximately $40 million, transfers to your name upon the submission of a signed, notarized confession detailing the events of August 14th, 2013. August 14th, 2013. I hadn't said that date out loud in over a decade, but it lived in my chest, like a stone. Theo was sitting across the table from me. We hadn't made eye contact once since I walked into that conference room. He was 41 now, gray at his temples, and he still couldn't look at me. I didn't blame him. "What happens to the money if I don't confess?" I asked. Hargrove folded his hands. "It goes to Theo, entirely." I almost laughed. My father, manipulating people from beyond the grave. He'd been practicing that move his whole life. Here's what happened on August 14th, 2013. Theo and I had been working for our father's company for 4 years. I was head of acquisitions. Theo ran operations. We were good at it, and we both knew that whoever our father liked better would eventually take over. It wasn't a warm family dynamic. It was a competition, and my father had designed it that way on purpose. That August, I found out Theo was skimming. Not a little. $300,000 over 2 years, moved through a shell account he'd set up using a subsidiary company name. I dug into it for 2 weeks before I was certain. I had documentation, wire records, everything. I never reported it. Not to my father, not to the board, not to anyone. I sat with that information for a week, turning it over, and somewhere in that week I stopped thinking of it as a crime I'd uncovered and started thinking of it as a card I was holding. Instead, I went to Theo, and I told him what I had. And then I told him that if he didn't back off from the Singapore deal I was trying to close, a deal that would have made me my father's obvious successor, I would burn him down with it. I blackmailed my brother. Theo pulled out of Singapore. I closed the deal. My father called it the best quarter in company history. 2 years later, Theo left the company quietly, and I became the heir apparent. I told myself Theo had made his own choices first, that I'd just used the tools available to me, that it was business. Theo moved across the country. Our parents went to his wedding, but I wasn't invited. When our mother died, we stood on opposite sides of the grave and didn't speak. My father never said a word to me about any of it, not once in 11 years. But he knew. Of course he knew. He built both of us to be exactly this ruthless, and then he was disgusted when it worked. The confession he was asking for wasn't for the courts. What I'd done wasn't technically illegal. Theo had been stealing, and I'd pressured him to stop. The confession was for Theo. Hargrove slid a single sheet of paper across the table, pre-drafted. My father had even written the template. I looked at Theo. For the first time since I'd walked in, he looked back at me. He didn't look like someone waiting to collect $40 million. He looked like someone who'd been waiting 11 years to hear the words. I picked up the pen. I signed it. When I pushed it across the table to Hargrove, Theo stood up and walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment with his back to me. "I was stealing because he was cutting me out," Theo said finally. "I found out he'd already decided. You were always getting the company. I just didn't know how to walk away. I hadn't known that. Maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. Maybe it would have changed everything." "I'm sorry," I said. The first time I'd said those words to another person in longer than I could remember. Theo nodded slowly, still looking out the window. Hargrove cleared his throat and slid the estate documents toward me. I pushed them back. "Split it," I said. "Half and half." Hargrove blinked. "That isn't what the will stipulates." "I don't care what the will stipulates. Get it done." Theo finally turned around. He stared at me for a long moment. "Why?" I thought about my father, about the competition he'd built between us, about the $40 million sitting there like a final test, one last move on a board he'd been arranging for decades. "Because he wanted to see which one of us would take it all," I said. "I'm done playing his game.